Hi, everybody. Welcome to the 2020 Fantasy Baseball Draft Preview. Now, we all know 2020 is an odd year. Spring training was shut down due to COVID-19. How does that affect fantasy baseball, especially with guys who play in leagues that have keepers and have been playing for a long time? Well, I have a couple of guys who've been playing for over 30 years combined. That's Ray Tchoulakian and Justin Dellinger. Guys, thanks for being here tonight on the show here with me.
No problem, Chris. Happy to be here.
Okay, so I'm going to start here now with Ray. Ray, you are the commissioner of this league. Talk to me about, what's going on with your 2020 league due to the fact that you guys have been playing this league for 15 or so years. 2020 is an odd year. How are you handling this year?
You're right, Chris. This is definitely unprecedented. And I, as the commissioner, I've been the commissioner of this league now for about 5 years. I took over from the previous commissioner. He's still in the league. There's 12 guys in our league total. And I was trying to push back our draft for as long as I possibly could. And it came to be the beginning of July. And Justin is in this league with me as well. And we were going to go back and forth. And I was also talking to some other guys in the league. Ultimately, we decided to just throw in the towel on the season. We decided not to play it all this year. However, we are a keeper league. So what we did was we have a system where everybody in the league can keep 2 players from the previous year's roster. And the year that the player is acquired, whether they're drafted, picked up in a trade, or picked up off the waiver wire somehow, that would count as 1 year of ownership. And then they can keep that same player up to 3 additional years beyond that if they so choose. And then there are other rules that we created to go along with that, connected to that. So everybody picked up their keepers from last year, from 2019. However, in terms of ownership periods, we're not counting 2020 towards ownership at all. And so if this would count as like the first year that somebody was keeping a player, then next year, 2021, would count as year 2, and then so on after that.
You both have been playing forever. How would you both construct a team this year? Justin, I'll start with you, and then Ray, I'll go to you next. How would you start to construct a team when doing a draft? If you were drafting, say, today to get started for Thursday and Friday when the season starts.
So the first thing that comes to my mind is about streaky players, and there are a number of players who they have the numbers at the end of the year. One of the ones that I first think of is Mark Teixeira. He always ended up with 30 to 35 home runs and 100 to 110 RBIs. But if you look at the breakdown, he would really do nothing in the first 2 months. And that would pretty much be an empty hole if you were to draft him in a game season like this. So, I would say avoid someone like Jose Ramirez, who I would avoid no matter what. I just have never been a fan. He's just way too streaky. Someone like Justin Upton, Giancarlo Stanton, Matt Carpenter. It's just too much. By the time they get hot, the season might be over. So I would say I'm avoiding players like that. And I'm even putting Paul Goldschmidt in that category. He used to be as consistent as he gets. He's not anymore. He's basically Justin Upton. I am going for consistency in my mind. I mean, I feel like this is common sense. But someone like Christian Yelich, I just saw it in the last 9 calendar months. During the in the last 9 months that he played baseball, he's never had an OPS under 935. That is, he's a number 1 overall pick. So saying to get Christian is pretty common sense. But I'm looking for players like that, players who have consistency, that don't go into these crazy don't homer for a month and then homer 10 times, because by the time they get hot, you're probably already going to be out. So I'm avoiding players like that. I'm looking for players like I'm a big Bryce Harper guy. I think he's ready to take a next step. I'm a big Machado guy. I think Machado, he's about to turn, 27? I think he fell so far last year, he's going to be ridiculously underrated. You can probably get him probably in the 5th or 6th round, which is pretty crazy considering he was a late first-round pick. As recently as last year, I think he was at the end of the first round. You can get Machado in the 5th or 6th round. I think he could put up 40 to 45. He's coming into his prime. People are going to overlook him. I think you got to go with someone like that. So other consistent players, I think Francisco Lindor is consistent. Alex Bregman, I'm a big fan of. Matt Chapman is my MVP pick for the AL. I would say get Matt Chapman. I bet you could get him in the what do you think, Ray? 7th or 8th round?
But I think that right around
Maybe
there.
not. Yeah. Another one I'm big on is Anthony Rendon. They're just consistent month after month, and I'm going for that. So that's how I'm going about drafting my lineup. I'm looking for I'm trying to avoid those really streaky players, because by the time they get hot, you might be out of it.
Ray, what
I
about
don't
you?
know how. I don't know how I can follow a Matthew Berry style breakdown like that, but I'm going to try. I think that the first couple rounds, the first 2 or 3 rounds, you pretty much know the types of players in a typical year are going to go. Trout, Acuna, Yelich, Rendon, DeGrom, Scherzer, and so on and so forth. This year, all bets are off because there are so many players who have either already opted out or at least thinking about opting out. Justin mentioned Trout. Freddie Freeman is recovering from COVID, so he's like a second round pick, borderline first round pick. So the first 3 rounds are all bets are off. And frankly, if you can land a Freddie Freeman later on, if he's still on the board later on because people may not touch him in the first couple rounds, if you can get him in like the 6th or 7th round, it might as well be worth taking a flyer on him if he's able to even produce, 2/3 or 3/4 of his normal production levels. Like I said earlier about pitching, as far as that goes, I think that's going to be at a very big premium because there are about 5 or 6 pitchers who you can pretty much consistently bet that they will get you, some quality starts and maybe even some wins. I think you can pretty much bet on each of those starting pitchers getting you 10 to maybe 12 starts across the course of the season. So that would be, if you can get you even half of that being quality starts, that could be a real big feather in your cap. So if you got to draft pitching early on, you might as well reach for that.
I want to go back to Justin for a second because you brought up a good point about fantasy baseball and players who take a long time to get started and then get hot at the end of the year. But what about players who start traditionally red hot and then tail off? Would that be something that you would look at? Somebody like Josh Bell last year for the Pirates who hit like 34 home runs before the All-Star break, but ended up with like 39 at the end of the year because he was white hot to start the season.
So what I do with players like that, and I don't like Josh Bell at all. I would avoid him at all costs. For someone like Josh Bell, had such a ridiculous 3 months, but really has been pretty average player for the rest of his career. What I do is I go back and I look at the last 4 years. Really, Josh Bell has had an amazing 3 months, and I need to see more before I'm investing in Josh Bell. I think he is a 20 to 25, 80 to 90 guy. I do not buy what his final numbers last year at all. I think he got ridiculously hot, and I need to see it again before I am investing in anybody like Josh Bell. I think there are usually more players that do the opposite, where they start off, it takes them to get a groove. But again, I'm looking at players, I'm looking for consistency. And another one I didn't mention is Mookie Betts. I think he's going to be a little bit underrated. Everyone's forgetting. This is the guy that's drafted 2nd and 3rd overall like the last 3-4 years. And his season last year, it wasn't bad. It just wasn't his 2018. He could easily put up, the equivalent of that over. Now I said Machado is going to hit 40 home runs. I obviously meant the equivalent of 40 over 60 games, whatever that comes out to be, whether 15 or so. So I'm looking for players that are just that are consistent.
Ray touched on it earlier with the pitching, and we may see openers this year, and we may see starters only going 4 innings, which then puts a premium on guys that would normally not be picked in fantasy baseball, which is a middle reliever, a guy who would come in the 5th, 6th inning, during a blowout loss or whatever. But now this guy might be kind of going to go 5 to 7, and he might end up with 6, 7 wins. How do you go about drafting these players this year?
Relief pitching is impossible to predict. It always has been and always will be. I mean, if you can get a decent relief pitcher, and Justin, feel free to contradict me on this as much as you like, but relief pitchers, you can get them for holds, you can get them for K per 9 if you have that stat in your league. ERA and WHIP are pretty reliable too. That's what I would probably expect to get from any relief pitchers that are out there. One guy who I really like from the White Sox is Aaron Bummer, who's very unfortunately named. But he had an ERA just over 2, had a WHIP of .99 last year, and it's over 60 innings. And I forget how many strikeouts he had. I remember looking that up not that long ago. But he's a great eighth inning guy, and he's a great setup guy for Colomé, who's also been fantastic the last couple of years. He's definitely a dude who I mean worth targeting fairly early if you want to get some relief pitching if you need hold help.
So I agree with a lot that Ray said. I mean, the one thing I'm going to disagree with is I'm not targeting Bummer early in my draft.
Okay, yeah, sure. He's not like a top 6 round pick. I'll give you. I agree with that. Yeah.
Well, I don't think he's a top 23 round pick, but unless you got holds, that's a different story. If you have holds, that's a different story. But the thing with relief pitching is, I don't know if you guys remember last year, but you remember who the top 2 relievers? I mean, I didn't look this up, but off the top of my head, it was pretty glaring who the top 2 relievers were last year. Do you remember who that was for April?
Are we talking about closers or non-closers?
The closers.
Well, Kirby Yates has to be one.
Kirby Yates and Shane Green, Shane Green had 18 saves in April and May, and then he had 4 for the rest of the season. And I think my strategy for relievers has always been I'm never drafting a top guy. I will never draft Osuna or Chapman because it's just so volatile. It's so I'm looking at people at the late round, like Ray mentioned Colomé. I had Colomé last year, and you can get him. No one thinking about him. His numbers were amazing. Colomé, Joe Jimenez on Detroit, Kennedy on Royals, Brandon Kitzler on Miami. Those are the type of guys that I'm going after. I'm just not wasting a 5th round pick on a closer, especially this year, because Ian Kennedy is, in this short of a sample size, Ian Kennedy is as likely to have Osuna numbers as Osuna is. Over the course of 162 games, it's going to even out. Chapman will be Chapman. Osuna's going to be Osuna. But over 60 games, it's just too crazy. And I think you're better off making more of sure things on the hitting side and then going after Hunter Harvey. I mean, just these pitchers that aren't going to – these closers that aren't going to go towards not going to go in the first few rounds. If you want to know about starting, I mean, Ray had mentioned the premium on quality starts and pitchers that can go. I am absolutely targeting someone like Cole, Verlander, Frankie. I think Nola is going to take another step forward in terms of innings pitched. These pitchers that can get you a quality start are huge. Quality start is a stat in our league. And having someone like DeGrom or another one who I was surprised by his innings is Bieber. Bieber pitched, I think it was 215 innings last year. I had no idea. So innings eaters are huge right now because, like Ray said, I think there's going to be a ton of openers and a ton of starting pitchers that go 3 and 4 innings, especially with these 30-man rosters. So when you get someone like Scherzer or Verlander or Bieber or DeGrom or Bauer, who you know is going to throw up, would be the equivalent of 200 innings, I think that's huge because not only would they – you don't have quality starts, they still get you the win.
I think Luis Castillo is a borderline guy in that group too. I mean, he's taken a big step forward last year, and he could be the ace of the Reds staff right this season or even next year too. If he can get you 6 or 7 innings, that's well worth the price of taking him in the 4th or 5th round.
What about a guy like Clayton Kershaw, who battles injuries year in and year out?
That is so unpredictable. I would probably stay away from Kershaw just because even though numbers-wise, stats-wise, he's still very close. They're not that far off from what his prime years were. But with that back injury that he's had year in, year out, if you can get him in the 9th or 10th round, take a flyer on him. But, I mean, if you're one of the Dodgers pitching, I mean, Walker Buehler is the guy who I would definitely target ahead of Kershaw.
What about a guy like Jake Adruzzi from the Twins? Everyone says the Twins are going to be good this year. I don't know.
Yeah, he's.
Do you mean Odorizzi?
Yeah, Odorizzi, my fault.
He's an interesting case, and he's another guy who he had an amazing 3 or 4 months, but I think we need to step back, not get too excited over that, and look at what he's done the last 5 years, which has been a serviceable number 3 and number 4. Last year, for about 3 to 4 months, he pitched like a 2, borderline number 1 at times. I followed him very closely because I had him in both my leagues and I dropped him. So every time he had another 7-inning, 3 hits, 1-run game, I noticed it. It hurt. So I followed him very close last year. He tailed off at the end, and I don't know how old Odorizzi is. I'd guess he's 29 or 30. But at that point, I think you kind of are who you are. And what, in my mind, Odorizzi, without looking in the stats, is a very, a serviceable number 3 who I'm not getting too excited over his 3 awesome months last year.
One name that was coming to my mind is a guy like Jay Happ. There's another guy who one year he could have 20 wins and another year he'd pop up with 7 wins. What do you do with a guy like him?
If you can get him in a late round flyer, I'd say go for it. But I would not necessarily, like Justin's been saying, not necessarily put all your chips in on someone like J.A. Happ. I think this year is going to come down more to the late round upside guys more than anything else. And I think that's true both of hitting and pitching. I think that there are just a lot of young guys who are still planning on playing. If you want to go with an Oriole, Austin Hayes is a great example of one who still has rookie status actually. But he's going to hit at the top of the order, at the top of the lineup every single night. And, it's kind of unpredictable as to what kind of power and what kind of numbers he can put up. But if you can get him in the 20th some round, that's a really fantastic value.
What about a guy like Alex Cobb, who's coming back after 2 years of injuries, but is healthy? No, we're talking about the Orioles right now.
Yeah, someone like Cobb, I'd probably have to see something. I don't know if I'm necessarily going to draft him. It all depends on how big your league is. If you're in a 16 team, sure, take a flyer on Cobb. But, for shallower leagues like 10 and even 12, the wins I don't think will really be there. So when you draft an Oriole player, your pitcher, you're probably looking more for Ks per 9 or strikeouts, if that's what your league settings are, or quality starts. And at this point, we haven't seen Cobb really do anything since when was the last productive year Alex Cobb had? I don't even know if that productive
16,
year.
17 was while he was still with Tampa.
I don't know if he was even that productive the year before the Orioles signed him. I think he was even hurt then. So someone like, when you're 2 and 3 years removed from injury and you're an Oriole, in my mind, you're not really draftable just yet.
I want to get to the taxi squad. I saw a guy like Lux get sent down today by the Dodgers, and obviously, he's seen some time in the big leagues, but he's going to be at the alternate camp. How would you go about trying to draft this taxi squad this year, knowing that all these teams are going to play so many players, given what's going on with COVID-19 and probably with injuries due to the fact that it's a sprint, not a marathon type of season? How do you go about trying to draft these guys on the taxi squad?
I think taxi squad guys are most of a factor for deep keeper leagues. We only have 2 keepers in our league, but there are leagues you can have 4, 6, maybe even more keepers than that. I think that's where taxi squad guys are a factor, and certainly dynasty leagues too. Anybody who plays in a dynasty league, they can pick up someone like a Gavin Lux or Wander Franco or some other premier level prospect, Luis Robert. Luis Robert's going to be drafted pretty high anyway, but young guys like that, Mackenzie Gore, may get called up by the Padres at some point. So guys like that, they would be really valuable in the dynasty league or a long-term keeper league. Those are the ones who that's really what it's really worth investing in, looking in who's on the taxi squad across the league. If you're just in a redraft league every year, I don't necessarily think that taxi squad is really that's a real big of a factor. Justin, feel free to chime in on this one.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Ray just said. Everyone's looking for the next Mike Trout, but what everyone forgets is when Mike Trout was called up, he did nothing in 2011. He did nothing. He wasn't ownable. But everybody just remembers 2012 and he was 19. And so people forget about that. So yeah, if you are in a dynasty league or if you're in a keeper league, like I had Yonder Alvarez just sitting on my bench last year because he just destroyed AAA too hard. And I was like, even if he does a fraction of this, I got to keep him. So, and it ended up paying off really well. But, if you're just in a standard, year by year league, I'm not really looking at. I need somebody more established. I coming into their prime. If you want to get Gavin Lux and throw him on your bench is the last spot, that's fine. But I mean, really, how often does somebody come up at 20 and 21 and set the world on fire? It really doesn't happen. Even the best case scenarios, like if you look at like Ken Griffey Jr. or Machado or or Harper, look at what they did in their age 19-20 season. It wasn't that great. They were okay. They helped their real life team. I don't know if they really helped that many fantasy teams. Look at any of their numbers. So catching lightning in the bottle, I think, is way rare than people think. And with that being said, you can catch someone that comes up, takes the league by storm before they adjust, because that does happen. I remember Trevor Story, I think in his first 8 or 9 games, he hit 10 home runs or something. It was something ridiculous at the start of 2015 or 16. So it does happen. And by the time the league adjusts, the season's going to be over. So,
by the way, did I mention that Justin is our 2-time defending champion of our league the last 2 years?
You didn't, but you just did right now.
Yeah. So anybody out there, I hope you've been listening to what Justin's been saying all along, because he clearly knows what he's talking about, and nobody has yet figured out how to beat him yet.
Justin's the kind of guy who picked up Juan Soto 2 years ago.
But I'll just have everyone know, in 2017, I won the league by 28 games as well, and I only lost because I did not pick up Matt Olson, and he went crazy. And the person I played in the playoffs picked him up, and Matt Olson was homering against me. So anyway.
Oh, man.
But fantasy is really weird, because I played since 2007, and I never finished higher than 4th, or I think 5th actually, for my first, whatever that was, 10 years. But something clicked about 3 years ago, and a lot of it is not going off of, I think a lot of people just pick up somebody who's a name and they feel like they can't drop him, where I've got to the point where I don't care what you've done. I care about what you're going to do. And I don't care who your name. I mean, I think a perfect example is someone like Mike Napoli, who's not playing anymore, but he was a name. So people would just have him sit. And I was even guilty with that with Ryan Zimmerman, where he had hit 30 home runs, but I'm thinking, when was the last time Ryan Zimmerman did anything? So I didn't care. I would drop him, and I've started dropping 5th and 6th round people. If they're not helping me, they got to go. So
no, but you also draft Byron Buxton every single year, just out of spite, just waiting for when he finally goes off.
So I had this thing with Byron Buxton where I drafted him 5 years in a row, and I didn't win the championship any years of those. And I also had this thing where Matt Kent burned me in 2010, and I was so pissed over how much he burned me. I picked him up in 2000. I hate picked him, and then he should have won the MVP. I think Ryan Braun won, but he had the better number. But sometimes that hate picking works, but a lot of times it doesn't as well with Buxton. Ryan Braun's a great example. Another one that's a big name. It's a former MVP, and people just pick him up because. But I mean, look at what Braun does now. Braun is a 15 to 20 guy and 70 to 80 RBI guy, and I would guess that's his average numbers the last 3 years, and that's just not going to do it in fantasy baseball. But, I bet you he's 65 to 70% owned in all leagues just because of his name, where you got people who can help you more on the waiver wire. So, I guard the wire like a hawk, and I probably jump too quickly. But I think the biggest piece of advice is just not – if it's a name, just don't hold on to it because they won an MVP.
Well, Ray and Justin, I want to thank both of you guys for being on here with me tonight. This has been a very informative half hour, and I hope everyone who watches this will get some tips and listen to you two guys and win their fantasy league of 2020, which is going to be a very odd fantasy baseball league. Thanks again, guys.
Best of luck to everybody out there. We probably can't do this show come next season, though, since Justin and I are in 2 leagues together. So we're drafting opposite each other.
Playing because I would never, if Ray and I were getting ready to play head-to-head, I would have never done this because Ray and I are battling, and actually we're in 2 leagues together. So
yeah, we are.
Well, I'm glad you guys were able to do it with me tonight, and thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
All right.
Thanks, Chris.
All right.